number 62, under what conditions does a Christian commit a mortal sin?
A person commits a mortal sin. Indeed, whether the person is a Christian or not a Christian is the same. A human being commits a mortal sin. There are three conditions theologians give us. First, the matter itself must be a grave one. That is a big matter. For suppose it is a question of 10 cents. It is not considered a grave matter, but it is something. Yeah. If 10 cents, a sheet of paper belongs to another person, but it will not be enough to send a person to hell. Mm-hmm. So it is not in theology considered grave matter, but it does not belong to me, so I should not take it. Right. So it must be grave matter. So a lie, depending on situation, because if you tell a lie in a court and somebody else is clamped to jail for 6 years, it's not a small matter. But if a child tells one little lie that it is still wrong, is a sin, but it will not be enough to send that child to hell. So that's what is meant. It must be a grave matter. Secondly, the person must know that it is a grave matter. And there are many degrees of knowledge, some of it difficult for us to assess, especially in other people. And thirdly, the person must freely decide to do it, not by force, not by fear, but freely deciding. If any of those three conditions is lacking somehow, it may still be a sin, but not now a mortal sin.
You know, this word fundamental option, or phrase fundamental option, has crept up in the world today, particularly in our part of the world, where they're saying that you really can't commit a mortal sin unless you totally divorce yourself from God. I mean, that you make a conscious effort that you literally want to be totally devoid of God. Now, most people commit a mortal sin. They're brought into temptation. They've allowed themselves to enter into an occasion of sin. Maybe it's a sin of impurity, and they know it's a mortal sin. They know it's grave matter. But they don't hate God, I mean, consciously. They just love themselves, and they want to commit that sin in spite of God, and they commit the sin. But what people are saying with this fundamental option is confusing people so much that they really can't commit a mortal sin when you think about it the other way.
When people put the theory in that way, yes, the theory is not acceptable, yes, to serious, good theology. Mm-hmm. It's not good theology. It is wrong. Yes. Because if they had said that it is most important that a person direct self to God always, mm-hmm, if they had said it positively in that way, that's acceptable. Mm-hmm. That it is most important to direct ourselves towards God. And whenever we notice we are turning away from God in any way, we should turn again towards God totally. If they said that, mm-hmm, that's good. Mm-hmm. But if they say, one single act alone is not a mortal sin, it is the person's formal rejection of God, yes, then they should be told that they are wrong. They got it all wrong.
But this is what's being said, though. This is really what's being understood and talked about. And I noticed the Holy Father condemned the fundamental option in his letter, Reconciliation and Penance, formally condemned it.
He condemned it.
And it's being taught, though. It's being taught in so many different areas where a sin, just an example, a sin of impurity, you know, a direct sin that is not mortal unless you really want to divorce yourself from God. Well, they don't do that.
Could I illustrate the error in that teaching in several ways? If we follow that teaching, very few people, if any, would commit mortal sin.
That's right.
Because according to that teaching, a person has, in a formal way, to reject God.
Right.
How many people do that?
Very few.
People come to baptism and they say, oh, I renounce the devil and all his works, I believe in God, Father Almighty. Then the following day, That man sees a woman, he likes that woman, he ignores the fact that that woman is not his wife, and he takes that woman and sins with her. Of course it is a mortal sin. Who said one act cannot be a mortal sin? Suppose I killed that person only once.
Yeah, that's right.
Will he say it's not a mortal sin because I killed him only once? I didn't declare that I hate God. Since I killed him only once, it's not a mortal sin. Or let us say he has a nice car, Mercedes, 500. And I took that car only once. And sold it and took the money only once. Yeah, right. You tell me that's not a mortal sin. A person burns the 54-story building only once. It's not a mortal sin. A person puts an explosive in a 747, blowing it up and killing 450 passengers only once. It's only one act. A person betrays his country, his government only once. Lord, help us. Yes. Let these people put their 2 feet on the ground.
But this is the understanding that has happened. I honestly believe it's entered into the sin of impurity more than anything else, because that seems to be the sin that is so prevalent today. And what they're saying is that, you know, it's a fault and you've fallen, but it's not a mortal sin because you didn't really hate God and reject God.
The consequences are terrible of such teaching. Yeah. They are lulling people into a totally false sense of freedom. Those people are sinners. For Christ said, for every single word people will speak, they will render an account of it on the day of judgment. Christ said, St. Paul said, the following will not inherit the kingdom of heaven: those who are thieves, those who are fornicators, those who are liars, and so on. You don't have to reject God by a formal declaration. Indeed, everyone who commits sin against chastity, or those who steal, they don't make a formal rejection of God. They simply do the action. And if the child spits at his parents and burns their house, that child does not need to formulate to the parents, I hate you, mommy, I hate you, daddy. No, the child has shown it by action. So one action alone can be a mortal sin. Judas sold Christ only once. Are we to say it's not a mortal sin? The 2 thieves crucified with Christ. One of them was speaking evil of Christ. The other one made a move. Just one act. You will see the difference. See the consequences for both of them. Pilate condemned Christ only once. You mean that's not a mortal sin? And Christ said to him, those who delivered me to you have the greater sin, which means the others have sinned. The others rejected Christ. So, in short, fundamental option, interpreted to mean that single acts are not mortal sins, is totally wrong. The Holy Father has condemned it. And even if the Holy Father didn't condemn it, common sense condemns it. Sound theology condemns it. It is not true. Because psychologically, when people act, they don't make formal declarations before the act. It is also like acts of love. When we love our parents, it is not necessary to formulate it. If you give flowers to your father, mother, fiancé, this is already eloquent in itself. If you visit a friend, 2 of you sit, sometimes you don't even talk. Yes. All these are ways they are non-verbal communications. So, fundamental option interpreted to mean that individual acts cannot be mortal sins, particularly matters touching chastity. That type of teaching is wrong. It is probably what misleads some people. So they think they are in state of grace. Yes. And they are going and receiving Holy Communion. And they are actually in mortal sin because they have done something which is gravely against the will of God. They were aware of that and they did it freely. If so, then St. Maria Goretti should not have received 15 stab wounds. She should simply have consented to Alexander, because she never declared that she went. We would not have one single matter if that theory were true. Not one. It's false.
Now, when you receive communion in mortal sin, that's a sacrilege, isn't it?
It is a sacrilege.
Now, what is a sacrilege?
A sacrilege is a defiling of a sacred thing. And of all sacred things, the Holy Eucharist is the most sacred because it is the body and blood of Christ. It is like Judas, after selling his master for 30 coins or deciding to sell him, he goes ahead and receives Holy Communion along with John and Peter and Matthew and Thomas, who loved Christ. Those were friends of Christ. So when they received the body and blood of Christ, they already had grace in their soul, and it increased the grace they had. Judas, however, didn't have grace in his soul because he was about to sell his master. He had already clinched an agreement, a contract with his partners in sin. And then he was looking for a good occasion. So that Christ said to him, what you want to do, do quickly. The other apostles did not know. And Judas, if he received communion with others that night, he would be the patron of those who receive Holy Communion in mortal sin. It's a shocking thing. They don't have grace before they receive. After they have received, not only do they not have grace, but they have now one more mortal sin on top of those they had before. It is like bringing food and giving a corpse. You must have life before food can do good to that person. Yes. St. Paul said it too. Those who receive unworthily receive judgment unto themselves. By judgment, he means condemnation.